Hey guys, Atlantean Vampire here. So this is going to be a really weird video, a spiritual video that will most certainly become political because of course. Um, so with where my path is, and I'm looking at my altar across the room and thinking about my Hyperborean faith, which combined, it has a lot of aspects to it. A bit of Gnosticism, different types of theosophies, or rather different types of osophies, Atlantean mystery school, Norse spirituality, Greek, Celtic, Slavic, and a bunch of other stuff, Hollow Earth, and it just, yeah. Yeah, just a bunch of stuff. And, I've been writing a book that you could say is like the schizo's guide, or rather, uh, the White Wizard, and I'm not talking about the light working, the White Wizard's Old Testament, so to speak, as I'd like to open a pantheistic temple to God one day, um, ran by women. It was people that are like, this guy's super patriarchal. Well, materially. Spiritually, I'm not, right? I tell my woman to go make me a sandwich. That's to be expected. She tells me to go downstairs, go into the catacombs, and start cleaning the bones. Just bitches in different ways. But no, I always heed the spiritual advice of women and acknowledge that, like, a lot of the stuff I talk about in this channel is their domain. Um, you know, yeah. And, chivalry, masculinity, honor, things like that should be my thing. But they're not. No. Anyway, so, yeah. Part of my path is combating two of the most horrid threats of, or rather, two Midgard. The main one being the Archons, right? And I really wanted to make this video dedicated to the Archons, or rather, dedicated to the subject, not, Anyways. It's to say that a lot of people will go off of this idea that the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth, Nidhogger, Elohim, Yahweh, El, that this being created everything we have here. I'm sorry to say it, but no, actually I'm not. This world is beautiful. The 9 realms and the realms beyond, there's trillions of realms on the world tree, are all a refuge from the hyper predators of the void. Our place is not a prison made by Yaldabaoth. Our home is a refuge to protect us from Yaldabaoth, which is why a big part of my spiritual practice is going to ley lines and healing ley lines. Because, believe it or not, my enemies, the opposite side of things, they will go to ley lines and they will literally torture animal. I'm okay with animal sacrifice, but they will go there and they'll like crush in a literal kitten or puppy's head with a hammer. They'll, get a girl drunk or roofied and take her there, and well, I'll not finish that thought. But they'll go to ley lines because they know that they are minor seals, right? It's a grid of seals. And when you break the seals, you gain the ability to potentially break bigger seals. And then there are seals of those seals. And then when you break enough actual major seals, you start to break pillars. And then when you start to break pillars, the firmament becomes cracked. Our reality becomes an AI hallucination. And what was meant to stay outside comes in freely. Think of the anchors from Elder Scrolls Online with Molag Bal invading Nirn through the plane meld. That, and you could think of the anti-cosmic cultist as Metamarco, or and go to Stephen King. The Archons, by the will of their lord, this being, the lion-headed serpent. The lion-headed serpent is like the Crimson King, right? A lot of the Archons are like Pennywise or Randall Flagg or the Man in Black or whatever. And there's part of the reason Yaldabaoth and the Archons specifically target children or target children through their followers is because children are the most psychic beings there are, and they're innocent. They represent a good shard of what makes Yggdrasil Yggdrasil, and they'll torture and ritualistically abuse children um, to corrupt their psychic essence to hurt Yggdrasil. It will never destroy Yggdrasil. Nothing can do that. But can it hurt it? Potentially. So they'll commit acts of trauma. And, one of Yaldabaoth's most popular cults that I've been enemies with, even though they have no idea who I am, if we're being honest here. But I've done spiritual combat against them, and just investigated and exposed as much as I could from behind the scenes. But the Order of the Nine Angles, I've been studying them. I've read all of Fenrir, which is their fucked up magazine line. Have all their PDFs, been studying them for years, trying to break them down. They are not neo-Nazis, by the way. Again, the whole notion of pillars and seals. The Order of the Nine Angles believes truly not in creating some united ethno-state imperium of the galaxy, but their whole goal is to become anti-cosmic gods, much like Elder Scrolls, where the elves, the Thalmor, try to destroy towers to destabilize Nirn so they can become gods again. Why pop culture? But they believe that culture is a seal, right? Which creates a paradox, because before culture, was the seal non-existent? Did we create a seal to stabilize reality when we first came up with the notion of culture? But then again, there's a multiverse, and race is much older than us, and I believe primordials. Like what can culture be broken down to? Maybe it's just existence inherently produces culture, so maybe there's always been a culture seal, and it can only be affected after a culture is developed. Either way, basically, if you were to destroy culture, actual culture, all across the earth, to eliminate culture, you could, in theory, break the seal of culture. But how do you break culture? Counterculture. Counterculture is a seal. Counterculture for counterculture. So, like, what they'll do is the Order of the Nine Angles are like, we're trying to destroy reality, free ourselves from the Archons. They're serving the Archons. Okay. Well, everyone hates Nazis, so let's just join the Nazis. And then, now that everyone hates them, we need to find out how to piss off the Nazis. Well, what's the basis of Nazi belief? 14 words. The basis of their belief is protecting white children. Well, they love white children. Everyone loves children. Well, now the vast majority of society hates us because we're Nazis. Let's just start fucking kids. So they start fucking the kids, and now mainstream society and the Nazis hate them. Well, what do Nazis really hate? Radical Islam, going on jihad. So they'll become pedophile Nazis that convert to Islam. Notice a pattern here. It's anti-cosmic Satanism. Anti-cosmic Satanism is its own thing. And by its nature, it's anti-everything. Satanism by itself, theistic or atheistic, has nothing to do with this equation. Anti-cosmic Satanism is it could be like the term could be just changed to anti-cosmic. Like we could just simply break it down, because then people would go, "Oh, well, that means Satan, and Satanism is the problem." No, no, I mean that's just what they chose to call themselves, because at mainstream everyone's afraid of Satan, right? So yeah, and a lot of these people aren't pedophiles, but due to their theological conviction, they will either enable it or force themselves to do things they're not into, just out of a sheer dedication to destroying Yggdrasil. If that sounds fucking insane to you, welcome to the club. Oh yeah, no, yeah, yeah. Point is, the Archons are such a nuisance, and people think they're spirits, right? And then some people think they're aliens. They're neither. They're their own thing. They exist outside of the tree, and they've constantly tried to come in. And there was a point in my gnosis, and I'll just say it flat out: everything in this video is gnosis. None of it, well, some of it, I guess, background things I picked up, but then I might read one thing and then I don't need to read the pages. I just fill out the pages for myself. So yeah, when you're like sources, I made it up. Real occultism. Anyways, yeah. With the Minosis, they once were able to physically come here and are in their true form and wreak havoc across the 9 realms, across the other realms, the greater spheres, greater dimensions. They were able to come here spiritually and physically and do horrifying stuff. And according to my gnosis, a certain Heimdall, who, again, I'm a pantheist. I have no interest. I acknowledge the gods, or the gods. I acknowledge lesser deities. And so far, I'm unimpressed. For instance, Odin, right? I remember when I was young, I was into Asatru, and I wanted to worship Odin. And Odin came to me, and he was like, I'm a necromancer. I'm a slickster. I am a teacher. I'm a scholar. I'm a librarian. The warrior thing is just a persona to, recruit people. And I'm like, what do you mean recruiting people? And he basically told me humans are stupid, the majority of them. There are a few people like you. You can go. He's basically trying to recruit me into the left-hand path, because Odin is a patron of necromancy and the left-hand path. His entire philosophy is that he started off as a nothing and then became a larger class deity, through many layers of existence, physical and spiritual and other equivalents. And I don't believe Odin's a spirit or a physical thing. He is his own thing. He can come here in flesh and blood. He can come here spiritually, whatever. But he told me basically, my path should be towards individuality, because no one else is worth it. To become a Wolf of Wall Street, essentially, to become an Ayn Rand objectivist. That there is nothing greater than the pursuit of someone who's self-aware, or the pursuit of a self-aware person's knowledge, right? Or the pursuit to knowledge. And he said there are those that either thirst for knowledge and want to know everything, and then there are slaves. Because I thought, hey, I want to get a Volknut tattoo on my chest. And he showed me something. He showed me something interesting. He was like, there are white nationalists that worship me as Wotan, and they'll call upon my son Thor and all these others, Aesir, to curse blacks, Jews, gays, all that. And if they offer good offerings, we'll destroy them. And if he basically said, if a black communist Jewish woman wanted to do a ritual to get Thor to bash the fash, is the offering good enough? And Odin or Thor will just strike a random skinhead dead. And then this creates like a really interesting conflict where Odin watches and is like, where basically you have people being like, there are these ancient gods, and anyone can have a connection to the Norse gods. I mean, they race mixed. There are mixes between Jotun, Vanir, and all of that, and they're very progressive. And Odin's gay. He's a gay wizard, and Odin doesn't give a shit. Oh, Odin dressed like a woman, and meanwhile Odin's like, I did. And it's like, yeah, the real people that'll inherit Valhalla are those that fought for justice, just like Tyr. And then, the skinheads, Wotanists will be like, yes, Odin, our god, Valhalla, we will reunite with our ancient white ancestors. And then Odin just really wants cannon fodder, like a legion in Warhammer 40k of Space Marines, or rather Guardsmen, for whatever he has planned. The more the better. And he uses the Vulcanite as a beacon signal for like, these souls are ours. So we got to look at the past, thousands of years ago, when people died in battle with a Vulcanite, or whatever. Maybe they made an oath. However that worked, right? Some say the Vulcanite is a recent invention, the tattoo at least. Whatever it is, whatever you did to designate, a position, a place in Valhalla by dying in battle, typically what would happen is everyone would want that. And if somebody raped someone's daughter and that person killed that person, right? The father killed the rapist died in battle. The rapist gets sent to Valhalla. And then also, the rapist's family is upset. His brother kills the father. Well, the father goes to Valhalla. Now these two, where you constantly fight each other and get resurrected to train, to become automatons, the rapist and the father of the victim are in the same room. Even worse, two tribes that want to destroy each other, common Germanic ancestry, they hate each other. One's way of life is better, and they hate each other really badly, and they kill each other. Now they're these two tribes that hate each other in Valhalla, and they get perpetually resurrected. You see where I'm going with this? Odin has designed Valhalla to basically motivate these people to perpetually train out of their sheer animosity. So what you have is transgender communist and hardcore white nationalist that Odin puts in the same room, not even in the same drinking hall. He puts them in the same room, locks the door, throws away the key. Odin is either a deity that'll empower you on the left-hand path, or he's an army recruiter. And he's honest. He's honest. He's honest with how much of a piece of shit he is, right? I'm just like, But yeah, I don't worship gods, because anytime I interact with the gods, it's always transactional. People say, they're animistic spirits that represent natural phenomena, or they are ancient ancestors. No, they are beings that have existed millions of years, billions, some trillions. And there are just as many races of aliens off-world on other planets that worship the Norse pantheon the same way our ancestors did. Same exact gods, same exact names within their language. And it's not because of phenomena. It's because at some point they conquered our Midgard, our greater dimension. Like that legacy exist in 9 separate dimensions, not just ours. I take it's a quite literal empire with quite literal physical and spiritual beings. No metaphors, no hyperbole. It's literal. And Odin, being kind of the way he is, will either physically show up, do his thing, and you won't know until after he's left, or when you do know, he's there in spiritual form, and that's how he works. That's how he's always worked. Um, Same thing with the Loa. I contacted Baron Samedi, the hitman of the Loa of assassination, of killing. He's what the guy that Papa Ligba would send out to kill people. And all of these like African American black nationalists that get into voodoo. I'm like, your gods hate you, right? These ancestors view you as a piece of meat, kind of like how the Aesir view us as just cannon fodder or potential scholars of the Scholomance. Well, so when they do care about you, it's out of sheer, like, I want to make you a narcissist like me. Or I want you to just go and kill yourself perpetually. But yeah, no. I contacted Papa Ligba and I contacted Baron Samedi. I asked for deep insights. It was not pleasant. I didn't like interacting with those deities. And yes, you can interact with them. No pantheon is race exclusive, which is a problem. That's why I'm not a pagan. Oh, well, Christianity kind of overreached. Yeah, well, your traditions, sure, you can make it Volkish. Doesn't mean your gods are Volkish. It would be nice if they were. But voodoo is only for the Haitian people, the Afro people. And the Loa are like, souls, souls. But yeah, I basically did a hypothetical. I was like, what can I offer you, Baron Samedi? This is fucked up. This video is going to get taken down. What can I offer you to make your presence known to a school of African American youth? Like 40 of them, all at once. It was like, I don't know, like a kilo of cocaine, some rare type of Caribbean rum, a bunch of stuff. He was setting out the contract. He's like, oh, you want 40 children dead that are you want them to be Haitian? You want them to be Asian? Like, can be any. They can be our own, right? And I'm like, yeah, humanity's fucked. I'm just like, this is why I don't interact with gods. This is why I don't interact with deities, right? Heimdall is the exception. I channeled a substantial amount about Heimdall. And he did combat the Archons, and he combated Yaldabaoth at one point. Like, physically combated Yaldabaoth. And a lot of practitioners talk about how when they interact with Heimdall, he seems more like an AI. He seems more like a technological manifestation, like the Skynet of Asgard, rather than a personal being. Within my channeling, and this is going to be out there. There was Buri. I wrote a book on Buri. I'm writing a book on Tyr, and then I'm writing a book on Heimdall, and then Odin. But after Buri died, Tyr took power. Tyr was the one to unite the 9 realms and marry Freya and have Balder. And my gnosis, Balder, is not a child of Odin. And Loki did get punished by Tyr for tricking Hodder to kill Balder. But also Balder fell madly in love with Hel and wanted to commit suicide, and his mother and father protected him, and he basically, the way I channeled it was, became so lethargic and consistently wanted to die, and he couldn't, and he would get drunk and have people shoot arrows at him, hoping that someone would hit the mark, that it would work. And Loki, out of sympathy, seeing that Baldur's parents were basically psychologically torturing him, um, the mistletoe and all that, Balder dies. Loki gets tortured. Balder goes to, Hell, and gets married to Hel, or Helheim gets married to Hel, and he becomes king of the dead. Which I got a death threat from some people into a Satru for that kind of gnosis, and apparently that is something that people that worship the Jotun under a neo-pagan tradition called Rocketator, Tater Totter. I don't know. Never channeled that, or rather, never read that. All I did was channel it, right? Um, but yeah, no. I'm so fucking tired. This vape is just. I need something potent. Never read any of that, but you know, sure, it had to be rubbed in my face. Anyways, yeah. Point is, Balder was initially very angry and wanted his mother to die. And yeah, there's so many layers to that, but Heimdall helps resolve a peace. And basically, in order to prevent future threats, basically, Tyr, with Heimdall's permission, rips out his eyes and soaks it in the cold fire of the iron wood. To make sense of what the rainbow bridge is, I always see the fruits of the tree as these balls at the end of branches, but there's more than one way to view reality. People have different manifestations where they'll view it as a pillar, dark tower, or anything else, right? A monolith, whatever it is. But there's a version of the tree that I've seen in channeling that hurts my head to think about, where like the rings around Jupiter, or no, is it Saturn? I don't remember. Um, Saturn, like the rings of Saturn. Imagine these worlds as little glass lenses that have a color hue to it, and the branch that can, like a dish, a glass dish in a dish rack. In its slot is, the branch of the tree, which projects power. And this light, you know, doesn't project sideways. It projects, by its sides, not by. It projects the light outwards from the edge of the plate and not the center. Um, and every world is aligned, and that alignment within my gnosis is the Bifrost. The Bifrost itself isn't a power; it's just an alignment. And the way I channeled it was that most greater dimensions are substantially far apart from each other, and basically all of the afterlives are not meant to like the afterlife of Asgard, Alfheim, um, Midgard, wherever. We're not supposed to spiritually be able to go to those places. They're supposed to be completely separate afterlives for the, like, a dwarf afterlife for when physical flesh and blood dwarves die. Now we can astrally project to Stonefellheim and interact with dead dwarves, and now we're under the impression that dwarves as a race are just spirits. No, there's a physical world very much like ours. Their own empire, technology, all of that. When we see elves, we think of them as spirits. No, there's a actual elf. But yeah, so why are all our afterlives connected? Um, Basically, Muspelheim and Nilfheim, the space between them wasn't that big. And they started, and there's a phenomena where sometimes two fruits on a tree, if the branches somehow grow towards each other, the fruit can actually fuse together and create a really fucked up looking fruit. So you have to imagine that if the dish rack containing all the different plates is upwards, right, then the two slots for Muspelheim and Nilfheim are angled, so the plates touch. And as a result, a weird mutated plate grows between them that would fit in a slot uh, downwards in the little. You have these angles. There's another one. Nothing's growing from there. So Jotunheim develops between the two, and the plate that grows is sideways, and it's fused to both plates. So how energy leaves the plates from its sides rather than the middle, going upwards, right? Like, you know, energy doesn't go through this side, it goes through this, right? And then you have, you know, two plates that are tilted. Jotunheim is like this. So it's light, especially because there's this weird kind of like nipples that form on both ends that are kind of like this shape of Jotunheim. And the fire, or the principles in which Muspelheim is built, and the nature and principles of the dimension of Nilfheim fuse together, create a really fucked up dimension that could be metaphorically referred to as steam, right? Two dimensions that are actually really have nothing to do with each other, creating this chaotic primordial anomaly. And as a result, you have cold fire. And in my channeling, I've referred to as, or I've seen Asgard referred to as hot ice. But, if Asgard is hot ice, Jotunheim is cold fire. And the energies of it is very potent. And because there's a funnel, rather than just evenly being dispersed, unnaturally, laid flat, there is a focal point. So just as this energy flows from both places into Muspelheim, creating cold fire, which is most concentrated on the planet of Jotunheim, there's a spiritual and physical planet. In the Ironwood, which blurs the line, I see a very large blue well of cold fire, guarded by Engerboda. And the cold fire, basically, that is Jotunheim, the light of Jotunheim, as all of these little, glass, plates are kind of see-through and have a color hue. So when they fill with light, they have their own form of color. The energy of Jotunheim, the cold fire, infinitely shoots through the Bifrost alignment. And as that light passes through each hue, it becomes a rainbow. Thus the Rainbow Bridge. And the Jotun, being of the essence of Jotunheim, being descended from refugees of fire giants of Muspelheim and ice giants of Nilfheim that were violent and fucked and had Jotun, generic Jotun. The Jotun being of Jotunheim and also being created in a similar way to the cold fire of the Ironwood, inherited as their birthright the right to go anywhere the fuck they want, physically or spiritually. And Jotun can bypass firmaments. They don't have to be invited in. They can go into whatever realm they want. Jotun can settle in the realm of the Fae, or the Jinn, or the Yokai, whatever you want to call them, or Earth, which is why we have red-haired giants that chase Native American people around. We have giant legends throughout Europe, and that one red-haired giant they found in Kandahar, Afghanistan. We have the bones to prove it. Literal Jotun that just teleported on Earth and decided to live here. And I believe they bred with Neanderthals, which I believe we get our red hair white Northern Europeans, Northwestern Europeans. I believe we get red hair from and one of our Neanderthal ancestors that had sex with a literal Jotun from Jotunheim. But anyways, which is also why I think it's a recessive trait, because it shouldn't exactly exist within us, just as how I believe blonde hair and blue eyes is a recessive trait from our Aldebaran ancestors, which are not humans. So it's recessive. But anyways, you know, and the other ones are just boring, generic primate monkey hair. But anyways, I have a red beard and blue eyes. Hybrid alien mode, but no, no, they're not aliens. They're ancestors. But yeah, so anything that utilizes the Rainbow Bridge, that utilizes the cold fire going through the Bifrost, um, could in theory travel to places that they shouldn't physically be able to travel to, which is how Buri established the Empire of Asgard and Tyr solidified it. Because in Minosis, Buri came across the Heart of Ice, or the Heart of Ymir, a primordial heart that still beats, and used that as a means to interface. Whereas Tyr is just born of Jotunheim in Minosis. There's conjecture on where Tyr is born. Maybe he was born in Nilfheim, whatever. Anyways, um, you know, and basically the Rainbow Bridge is enhanced by the energies that are exclusive to the dimensions that it passes through, making them no longer exclusive, you know. And since this light is the proverbial essence of everything, our time or lack of time, our lives, our moments, past, future, whatever, spiritual and material. Basically, it's to say that something that truly bonds with the Rainbow Bridge or the Well of the Ironwood is capable of things that maybe one should not be capable of, if that makes sense. And within my gnosis, Tyr cut out Heimdall's eyes and soaked them in the ironwood, creating eyes that were covered with a rainbow hue. And the result of this was these eyes going into Heimdall and him becoming omniscient and omnipresent. Not omnipotent, just, everywhere and knowledgeable of all things. And became the watchman of Asgard. And the fucked up thing was, when I was channeling an ancient thing that already happened, the level of Heimdall's understanding was, when I was channeling him in the past, before the full transition of what he would become, he mocked me while I was writing it. Like, I thought, because anytime I channel a past event, it's not like this is happening right now. That would make sense if an entity could go, oh, I feel like someone's watching me. But if it's already happened and you're just looking at the records, then you don't expect anything. It's never happened to me. And for the first time yesterday, first time out of all my years of channeling Gnosis, an event that happened eons ago, Heimdall is having a conversation with Tyr. I'm writing down the conversation in my book. And then Heimdall looks through Tyr, looks at me, and basically goes on to insult me. And basically says to Tyr and to no one at the same time, I don't have the video space to edit it in, otherwise it would be more accurate. But basically, I know everything, In fact, I know that someone that may or may not exist is watching me, and they're writing down our story in their cantos because they cannot get a grip over reality. They cannot begin to fathom what's going on. It's a futile attempt at understanding what cannot possibly be understood. And then he looks at me and says, "Cease and desist." And I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm just writing this. And then he says, I'll say it in a way you understand. Render unto Caesar's the things that are Caesar's. Render unto God the things that are God's. Leave the affairs of the gods with the gods and worry about your world. And he basically compared my ability to channel as a very primitive ability, similar but more primitive to his own, right? A similar but more primitive ability to his own, which I never considered that my ability, because, spiritually, all of us have souls, and our souls come from two souls mating. And souls have different qualities. And my soul is half Jotun. Again, I don't want to talk about me. I don't want to make this about me. Which Jotun? And a Jotun of the Ironwood. And again, I don't want to go, I'm the son of this god. No, that would throw off the entire course of this video. But I will say, it was that unique pedigree that gave me the ability to talk to serpents, snakes when I was a child. But I do wonder if my ability to channel things that people all the time accuse me of lying and say, oh, well, you must have read this and that. And I'm like, no, I didn't. I just channeled it. Well, there's no fucking way. There's no way. Maybe a little coincidence here and there, and they're going on the assumption that it's all bullshit and I've had to have read it. And they're like, you're lying through your teeth. You read this and that. I have ADHD. I can't find the fucking motivation to read the amount of books you're accusing me of reading. I have half the books you're accusing me of reading. I haven't read them. They are fucking covered in cobwebs because I have ADHD. And if you can just channel it and figure out what's been written to more accurate detail than what has actually been written, why the fuck are you going to read? But yeah, I never considered that my ability to channel such things, to channel the multiverse, was related to the Rainbow Bridge. But Heimdall addressed that. And even though it's something that already happened, like, he was flaunting, how knowledgeable he was, to where he saw a random ass mortal human being channeling him having that conversation in past tense and could just look at me and be like, yeah, this is how much I know. It's just wrong. It just feels wrong. And yeah, overpowered, disgustingly powerful, like probably the most powerful deity I think I've ever came across. And I'm just like, and then he basically said, because you so desperately crave to understand what I'm talking about, I'm going to cut you off from this gnosis, and you will have to skip into the next chapter. There is so much context I needed to complete that chapter. And he's like, since you won't stop looking at me. Because he knew I was looking at him, even though, it's not like he's actively, like, he sees me, but he knows that at that point I will be watching him and he just changes fate just to be like, and he refers to me, like, after saying you have an ability similar but more primitive than my own, and he says the whole render onto Caesar's and God's thing. He basically says to me, I am the Watcher of Asgard. I am Asgard. And then he refers to me as a childish watchman of Midgard, which initially I was insulted. I was like, but then I was like, Heimdall called me a watchman of Midgard? I would have never have thought of that for myself, but that is my entire path. Doing what Heimdall does for Asgard for Midgard. I like that, and I'll take that. But yeah, no, like, Heimdall is probably, like, the only, like, deity that after channeling, I'm like, like, I plan on building an altar to Heimdall just because, yeah. But I'm not even going to talk about how he fought Yaldabaoth, because that just becomes way, way too much. Definitely, like, the most righteous ancient creature that I've ever channeled. I'm like, this, how can I not worship this being? So, you know, not to be a pagan, like I'm a pantheist. I acknowledge the existence of gods, um, or lowercase g gods, but like I know their nature. It's a very fickle nature. Whereas Heimdall went above that. And it was after this process of fully embracing his sight that Heimdall, at that point, in my opinion, became an avatar of Apsu, and or the monad, and became completely and utterly. If it wasn't for the fact that he wasn't omnipotent, then I think he would have been completely lost to us. Just knowing everything and being everywhere at once. Like, he is aware that I'm making this video. He's aware of what I did earlier when I was alone and got home from work and was in bed. Anyways, yeah, no, just yeah, like, you know, but you know, he called me the Watchman in Midgard. See, I like that. But yeah, no, he basically became the Skynet of Asgard. So your assertions when channeling, oh, well, you know, he seems like a robot. Well, yeah, he became Spock from Star Trek, essentially. And a good friend of mine was talking about how, in order to gain access to the guardian angel or the higher self or things like that, the God self, one has to relinquish individuality to take on such godlike power. And the sight given to him by, like, by his eyes, by, being connected to the iron wood, uh, is so potent that he can't really be a personable being, because when channeling him and writing some of his story, very personal guy, gruff old war veteran that served under Bury, had his own personality, his own sense of humor, and then like after the eyes, just a dutiful stoic robot that's just like watching everything to make sure everything's going right for Asgard. Fuck everyone else, but you know, to his credit, does a fucking great job. Because have you heard of Ragnarok happening lately? I haven't. Yeah, like, this is a being you cannot trick, you cannot deceive, a being that is pure and just incorruptible, like just completely autistic too. I mean, we're just being honest here. Anyways, yeah. So I mean, you know, but yeah, it was inspiring where I was like, I was watching this deity fight Yaldabaoth, and it just made me rededicate myself to my path, and I want to fight archons spiritually. I wouldn't want to fight them physically, goddamn. And according to my gnosis, Heimdall is the reason archons have been physically banished from the Nine Realms and beyond, why they're not physically able to exist here, but are able to project lesser manifestations from the void as spiritual beings. That I found very interesting. Heimdall is the reason why there are not literal archons. And when I get into the nature of the archons, you're going to think, thanks, Heimdall. Even if you don't worship him, you just got to think, oh, Heimdall. Like, thank you so fucking much. Like, thank you. Um, like, thank you, Heimdall. But I can't even, it doesn't do it justice. But yeah, so the archons, what is their purpose? So you'd have to get into the purpose of Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth, within my channeling, is the patron god of the ego. Now, I know 90% of the population uses the ego in a very specific context, like pride and all of that, and self-loathing. But when I did my first path working with a deity, with Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt and the cosmic nature of things, which I later channeled to be the same being as Kali Ma and Tiamat. When I did my path working with Tiamat, or sorry, not Tiamat, no, Kali, when I did my path working with Kali Ma, she taught me something interesting, and I don't know if it aligns with any actual Eastern practice, or if a Hindu person is going to be watching this and be in their full Kali devotee. Every time during the Kali Puja, they're like, oh, Om Him Shrim Klim Ajya Kalika Parameshwari Swava, and they just say that 108 times. No, um, and if you're so if you're Bengali, Tumi Kamanachu. Oh, Ami Baluachi. Kemcho? Pajama. Anyways, um, I know way too many Indian people for my own good. Anyways, I love them. I like. What can I say? I love Indian people, except for that one asshole who keeps calling me about my car's extended warranty. I told him to KMS, but I keep repeatedly telling him to KMS, right? And if you ever hate Indians for this, just remember the Indians suffer from these people too. Anyways, but yeah, so the way I learned of what the ego was that the ego was arrogance and self-loathing. And I usually hear of like humility being this counteraction of the ego, the way it's typically represented, and pride being the ego, itself. But within my channeling, Kali presented a revolutionary idea that just makes sense when you really sit down and think about it. It makes more sense than standard definition, where she basically said that the ego is arrogance and self loathing, that those that are egotistical have not accomplished anything for themselves, any victory worth loving themselves for. And out of this lack of self love, they will try to inflate it artificially by either taking credit for someone else's achievement or committing some small feat that's insubstantial and then dramatically extending it, like to compensate. And they are cancer upon everything. And then self loathing. These are the kind of people that not only do they make mistakes like everyone else, but they, again, are, people think of arrogance and narcissism. Sure, they never think of narcissism and self loathing. These people want to be at the center of everything because they want to feel important. So the other side of the ego is self loathing, where not only do they make mistakes, but mistakes only exist because of them. Where it's not just something happening to you, it's something that's happening because of you. And channeling that, I was like, guilty. And then the arrogance part, guilty. And I'm like, okay, so what do I do to slay the ego? And Kali says to me, that it's not what everyone will tell you, where people will say, let go of your sense of self and, uh, go to nirvana and expand and all this, live selflessly. You can do that, sure. But that's probably the main way. But that the direct opposite, which is often what people consider the ego to be, the direct opposite, in order to not be an egotistical person, in order to fight against the ego, you have to be prideful and humble. And then, even then, within Western trains of thought, people think of pride and humility as polar opposites. And she explained to me that, pride is the opposite of arrogance in that you love yourself because you achieved something. You achieved a victory that is awe inspiring, and you ought to give yourself credit. You ought to love yourself for that. And then humility is to recognize when you've made a mistake, fess up to it, and do your part to make it right, and not to bear on your shoulders things that you are not to be blamed for, even if other people make you feel like you should be blamed for it, or some part of you wants to blame yourself. I watched a friend die of cancer. Self-loathing, rather than humility. And that self-loathing can take away from humility, because if you're looking at all these things where you're like, I'm this menace, this is my fault that this thing that's unrelated to me happens. You're so focused on that you're actually not going to acknowledge the things you actually did do wrong. You're going to focus on everything else that you didn't do wrong, as if you are the reason why it's wrong. You know, it's yeah, the same thing with arrogance, and the way I channeled it was that Yaldabaoth is the patron god of arrogance and self-loathing, of the ego, a patron god of capitalism too, patron god of sexual sadism and fear. And the two, like, this is Pennywise logic, maybe not with the sexual part. Yeah, yeah. Um, Never read It, chapter 22. Don't do that, is you'll feel bad for the clown. But yeah, so anyway. Oh, oh, that's such a painful memory. I was really enjoying that book too. Anyways, I don't care how much cocaine you did in the woods. That's not a justification, Stephen King. That's not a justification. It's, oh, but it's crucial to the plot. Fuck you, it isn't. It is not crucial to the plot. No, no. But anyways, much as how Pennywise just feeds on life force, like a vampire, like me, like an astral vampire, psychic vampire, he doesn't need people to be afraid of him to consume their shine, consume the shine or the ESP of children. But fear seasons the meat, so to speak. He really likes the seasoning. Much as how I don't believe there are emotional vampires. I don't believe in that as an astral vampire. I only believe you can vampirize off of spiritual energy that might flow through a chakra associated with a certain emotion or bodily function, and maybe that flavors it as an imprint of that emotion. But if I drain your heart chakra, actually you might feel depressed. Okay, never mind. Never mind. But I don't believe you can actually take someone's mental energy. That's not a thing. But yeah, I guess there might be some sympathetic vampire that or whatever. It will certainly have to, because that's just extra. But no, there are psychic vampires of Lilith that consume whatever. Anyways, so yeah, Yaldabaoth feeds on life force from mortals and gods and everything there in between, and his favorite flavors of it is fear and sexual trauma. And also to mention, Yaldabaoth is the patron deity of pedophilia. Every pedophilic act psychically empowers him in his effort to destroy existence. So that's something to think about. Yeah, he's such a fucked up god too, because like when I channeled Moloch, right, I wanted to understand the truth of Moloch, because there's no archaeological evidence of child sacrifice. And I channel Moloch and I kind of mockingly say, hey, could I offer you a sacrifice of children? And he threatens to destroy me, to absolutely shatter me into a million pieces if I say something as awful as that. And I'm like, so what is your purpose? And Moloch said that he actually existed to protect Canaanite children, but a certain cult of people um, were sacrificing Canaanite children and their own children to Yahweh or Yaldabaoth, and people were catching on, and they didn't want competition with other pantheons, so they just pinned the blame on Moloch and said, "Oh well, this god that you've never sacrificed children to, you're all sacrificing children to him. I can't believe we're doing that," and they do a very similar method, where basically more than 100 nations have accused them of child sacrifice. And I love how we basically take as a source of reference, base our opinion on Moloch and off of an account written by a group of people that have been accused of child sacrifice more than any other group in human history. You know, it's like going up to Epstein and being like, well, what really happened on the island? Well, we just played games. We played tic-tac-toe. You you can take my word for it. I would know. Yeah, no. Anyways, yeah, so Yeah, Yaldabaoth is just, yeah. And the Archons are just little teeny fragments of Yaldabaoth. And when I channel them, they're a mix between corrosive metal, like they're artificial in their nature. They have no real emotion, and they're fleshy too. They have a fleshy like element, and this flesh is corrupted. It represents plague and pestilence. So they're like little spiritual cyborgs, or at least they're manifestations in our spiritual. Which even though they're not physically here, they can fuck up things for us very much so. Very much so. Yeah. So the archons will live in the subconscious. Like they will travel within your spiritual body and in your brain. Like their spirits will possess and occupy your subconscious, somewhere between your physical and spiritual. And they will interface with your brain, and they will fuck up your life and fuck up other people's lives. And the tactics they do to people, I'll briefly cover some of them, but I'm tired. Um, but yeah, no, they will primarily feed on your fear and your sexuality. They will pervert your sexuality, So and it's like chicken and the egg. If they possess a random kid, that kid is more likely to find adult content. If a kid has found adult content, they're more likely to contract an archon as they're the proper host for it. So whether or not they make a host or find someone that's already suitable to be a host, they'll do it nonetheless. Um, and yeah, they are attracted towards trauma, especially like I said, sexual trauma. So they'll attach themselves to rape victims, but they also love attaching themselves to rapists. Yeah, and they are, to my knowledge, and I'll leave a link in the description. There are frequencies like Tibetan singing bowl esque, certain hertz that actually hurt them, pun intended. Certain energies that when you